Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. If there's one area, one region, one topic that I find consistently confusing, it's the Middle East. And a great example of that is if you look at the anti-Israel, pro-Palestine protesters that are very anti-Jew, that are being funded by Soros, who's very closely tied with Israel and is a very prominent Jew. That's just the tip of the iceberg of the confusion that is out there. And I think that whenever we fall into this mentality of A versus B, left versus right, us versus them, and we generalize, we're falling into the trap. We're falling into the trap of these creatures, these monsters that are trying to eliminate us from this earth, which is focusing on this one particular group that, okay, it's only them. Whereas I think it's much broader and much more complicated than that. And so joining us today is Leo Zagami, who is a self-professed ex-Illuminati, someone who was within this class of people, within these secret societies that left and has now become a whistleblower, lives here in America now, very pro-America. And he's written books and books and books on this. And when you hear him speak, it's like he's just dumping book knowledge. I mean, he's so well researched, but he's a great person to get perspective on. And so he and I are going to be talking a lot about the Illuminati and the secret society origins of the conflicts in the Middle East, specifically how it ties into Islam, but also the other religions. So it's going to go pretty deep. He's someone that talks a lot, which you'll see. And so I ask my questions, I let him answer. So if you need us to slow the show down, perhaps he has a pretty thick Italian accent, maybe you need to do that. But this guy is just loaded with information. So folks, please enjoy the show. And you all set?
Yep.
Okay. Pardon me. Mr. Leo Zagami, it is great to have you back on the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me on. And of course, with a new book and so many new topics that we can outline during your excellent show.
And I have to say, our conversations are never boring. They're the opposite. They're fascinating. And you have such an interesting perspective on so many things that it just, I'm excited for this. So in our last interview, which we dove into a lot of different topics, one thing you mentioned was this upcoming book talking specifically about, actually, I'll pull it up for folks. It's Confessions of an Illuminati, Volume 10, Islamic, Freemasonry, and the Secret Societies Behind the Eternal Conflict in the Middle East. And this is really great because I'm not happy with the surface. I'm not happy even with 10 feet below the surface. I want to go straight down into like the deepest origins to understand what's really happening. And the Middle East is a place that I find consistently very difficult to understand. Like, especially when you're looking at, you have, for instance, Soros, who's Jewish, funding the anti-Jewish pro-Palestinian protests. Yet, like, there's all these things that.
Well, you went into a topic that actually I cite in my book, and I explain also why Soros does that.
Well, good. So let's just, let's just go ahead and jump in. So help us make sense of these secret societies and how they tie into what we're seeing play out with the Middle East, with Islam, the holy war. It seems like they're trying to bring about a holy war between the Christians, the Jews, and the Muslims. So anyway, wherever you want to start, just go ahead and dive right in.
Sure. Well, this book was something that I wanted to really write for a long time. I was really into getting this book together for almost 2 decades because of my past experiences, direct experiences with Islam in the Middle East, in Turkey. So this is a book which is, of course, considered an essay, but has also biographical elements of importance. And it has actually been written also in a way reflecting the times we are living, because as soon as I started writing this book, it was early October. A week later, we had the 7th of October attacks on Israel and the unleashing of this chaos that is, of course, manipulated, controlled, crafted as part of a very ancient alliance, which has seen the Knights Templars having one of the most important fortresses in Gaza already a few hundred years ago, as well as Gaza becoming the holy city of the Sabbateans, which are these heretical Jews. So when you ask me about George Soros, this guy is no ordinary Jew. He is basically a Sabbatean Frankist. And who are the Sabbatean Frankists? They are basically the ones who, in a way, inspired even the Holocaust. And we know that George Soros had even an active role in rounding up his fellow Jews, which is quite incredible. No? So this book is not about taking sides. I want to stress this out. But it's about bringing clarity, especially in subjects that are not known, like you said, outside of the Middle East, especially here in America. We don't really know what's happening. And a lot of times, our servicemen and women are sent abroad to fight these hideous wars for the military industrial complex without really knowing why they're fighting them, or most of the times with some kind of narrative that is being built up and is, of course, the fruit of disinformation or a big psychological operation. So this book is very important for me personally because this year my son, which I have not seen since 2008, Isaac Rumi, is actually dedicated to him, will be 18. And this book explains how in 2008, basically, I was accused of espionage. The mother, who was my first wife, brought him away from me because she is part of this very important Sunni Islamic movement called the Gulen movement. The father was a co-founder with Fethullah Gulen, and we know from the media that Fethullah Gulen, of course, was accused of being the guy behind the coup in 2016 in Turkey. So I have never seen my son again, and I hope he will read this book. But I know that he's being brought up by his stepfather, Murat Saraili, who is a senior member of the World Economic Forum. So here we have basically not only an essay about the history of Islam to make people also understand the complexity of this religion, because this religion was born, of course, in the Arab Peninsula, but soon after spread like a disease, we can say, but also spread accordingly to their own version of monotheism that had to be implemented by force, by the sword, most of the times. And at the same time, we see also that within the very same family of Muhammad, controversies arise. And that basically we soon end up with the schism, which brought up the other faction, which is now also known through Iran, which is the Shiite faction of Islam, Shia Islam. And in my book, I wanted to explain to the average Joe how this religion was born, how in spreading its tentacles around what used to be very ancient traditions and lands, because it arrived in Egypt, it arrived in Persia. Here we're talking about Sumeria, ancient Sumeria. I mean, we're talking about how a religion born out of seemingly modest surroundings like merchants in Mecca arrived to become so powerful. And so this book really reveals all that and more. Facts that are little known even to Muslims themselves. I did all my research, of course, like I told you, partly because I was myself involved with Islam at one time, because after I conducted this ritual in Cairo, I met my first wife, who was a descendant of Prophet Muhammad. And of course, you are obliged to be a Muslim to marry a Muslim. On the contrary, a Muslim can marry a Christian woman. That's very convenient, but that already gives you an idea, no? So then, unfortunately, things didn't go very well, because I discovered that this organization, the Fethullah Gulen movement organization, was actually connected to the Jesuits, and who even wrote the introduction for one of the most important books of Fethullah Gulen, which openly talks about New World Order. Giuliani tried to convince Donald J. Trump to extradite Gulen, who is here living in Pennsylvania, here in America, but he didn't manage to do that. And Fethullah Gulen is still living here, protected mostly by the Clinton Foundation, because it's very close to Bill and Hillary Clinton. So when we are talking about Islam, it's not only a religion, it's also a very political setup, because the Quran itself is not only a religious system, it's also a juridical system, a legal system. And of course, the average American will have, for the first time, and I'm really stressing this because my book has arrived to be one of the best sellers in Islamic social studies, in Islamic history categories on Amazon. So this is like with books like Son of Hamas, for example. The other day I was actually number 2, it was number 1. I mean, this book is having a good success, and I hope it will have also a wide success in the Muslim world, because, of course, it could open up the eyes of many people. When you talked earlier and you introduced the show, you said some very interesting things, like the fact that you don't want to simply scratch the surface. You want to go deep into the information. And this book really goes deep, 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 and it brings you at the end to acknowledge that here there is an almost 1,000-year alliance between the Western Illuminati, who at the time were the Knights Templars, who allied secretly with a faction of Islam to operate the divide and conquer policy, or divide and rule, amongst Islamic factions that were already fighting. So the Knights Templar allied with the Shia Muslim, the Shiite Nizari assassins, to execute their enemies in the Sunni world of the advancing Seljuk Turks of Saladin. This already gives you an idea. I mean, the secret alliance is pretty unorthodox. And I mean, at the time, we didn't have Protestant churches or evangelical churches. We had, of course, the Oriental churches, and we had, which were prevalent in the Byzantine Empire, and we had also, of course, the Vatican with its form of Christianity that was very influential, but wasn't that influential in the Middle East. However, legends have sprung up on the internet due to some information that was relayed by an alleged Jesuit called Alberto Rivera, that the Vatican was even behind the creation of Islam. So I wanted to immediately clarify this point in my book, explaining that in reality, the rise of Mohammed was facilitated by the cousin of his first wife, who was also the woman who sponsored him. Otherwise, he would never have been able to go for decades in a cave, channeling an hypothetical angel to write down this Quran. She was one of the richest women in Mecca. Mecca was a pagan center with 360 idols. But the cousin of Khadija, the first wife of Muhammad, was actually an Ebionite priest, Christian Ebionite priest. Now, the Christian Ebionites are a Jewish sect that converted to Christianity without adopting certain elements that, of course, Rome sanctioned, like the divinity of Jesus and all the rest. So, but they were very monotheistic. And today, there is hadiths that talk about it, but they are ignored by Muslim scholars, because the fact that a Christian could have inspired Muhammad is already a bit controversial. But in my book, I dig much deeper than that, because I show how the controversy that started from the fourth caliph of the Rashidun Caliphate, which was the caliphate that started with the first appointed caliph by Muhammad, Abu Bakr, who was basically the one that is still recognized by the Sunni. While instead the Shia recognize equally as important the cousin of Muhammad who married his daughter Fatima, Ali. Okay, this might seem just like a squabble between relatives and friends, but it became, of course, a very important thing in the development of Islam, especially when Islam, like I said just a moment ago, started to spread in Persia, Egypt. I mean, at one point, the Fatimid dynasty, which was Shia, Ismaili Shia, established itself in the future city of Cairo, known initially as Al-Qaeda. And the Cairo, as you can imagine, had a pre-existing amount of knowledge coming from ancient times, from their deities, from Alexandria of Egypt, from Memphis, that was an important center for the worship of Isis, of Serapis. So what happens here?
Folks, I have a quick message for you. Look, the 2024 election is do or die for the globalists and communists that have infiltrated our country and are currently running it. And they either have to win or they're going to destroy America so nothing is left either way. And if you're the person that's watching this show and following this information, unfortunately, you have the weight on your shoulders of making sure that your family is prepared, especially as we head into this next year and this next election cycle, because unfortunately, I think it's going to get rough. And one of the ways I know they're going to target us is through our food supply. You can see all the food factories burned down. You can see the warnings of coming famines and food shortages and everything like that. And food is one of the number one ways totalitarian regimes have always used to control the population, is destroy the food supply. So if you don't have at least 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months worth of stored food, I highly recommend you take that very seriously because, look, as I mentioned, if you're the person that's watching this, you're the person that carries the burden of making sure your family is prepared. I would recommend at least 6 months, if not a year, of storable food. So if things go haywire, whether it's grid down or terrorist attack from what's coming across the border, that your family can safely stay in place and you can feed your family. So folks, today, go to heavensharvest.com and make sure you get your storable food that'll last for up to 25 years. Just in case things go south, you know that you have what's going to take to feed your family, which is so, so critical for us to get through this next stage of history. So go to heavensharvest.com today, order your food that'll last up to 25 years, and use promo code Seth to save 15% on your entire order. Again, that's heavensharvest.com and use promo code Seth, S-E-T-H, to save 15% on your entire order.
What happens is that basically this caliphate that established itself, this dynasty that established itself within the Shia world, became very successful. And it's probably in the history of the Shiite Muslims, the most successful. Because at one point they expanded from Cairo to Sicily, so all south of Italy, all the Middle East going down to Syria, all the Middle East going down to Mecca and Medina. So, I mean, here we are talking about, they never really managed to take over Baghdad, but they were kind of attempting that too. The Fatimid dynasty lasted not so long after all, lasted a couple of centuries. We can say that their influence lasted a couple of centuries, but it was, of course, a very influential moment for Shia Islam and also for Islam conquering lands that belonged earlier to the Byzantium Empire. So Christians, of course, were converted, and at times they were not really converted. It's not true that they were always converted by the sword. At times they were converted out of convenience. What does it mean? That when they arrived in a place, if you were Jewish or Christian, you would be recognized as a legitimate religion, but then you will also have to pay extra taxes. You will also have problems in maybe your own career, not reaching the heights of whatever institution you belong, because, of course, the Muslims were giving a more favorable option. So what happens here? That out of convenience, a lot of people just say, okay, I'm Muslim. But there were also those who, like I explained in this book, made a different choice, a very different choice that actually ended up being a key factor in the build-up of the Renaissance in Europe. I'm talking about the city of Aran. Aran was, now it's in ruins, it's in present-day Turkey. It was a city established by the merchants of the city of Ur. So we're talking about ancient Sumer. We're talking about a very ancient, a city that worship the goddess Sin, Nanna, the moon goddess. And here we go back to the symbol of Islam. The moon is not just a coincidence. It's the absorbing the pre-existing moon goddesses that were so popular, like Isis, in the Middle East, that in the end they are featured in the symbolism of Islam. But initially, actually, the moon and the crescent was not really a symbol of Islam. So Aran became the chief seat of the Illuminati of the Middle East. And when they were actually reached by the Muslim Caliph, they made a very clever decision. The Muslim Caliph at the time was conquering the lands, arrived there and says, "What religion are you?" And these guys said, "What religion are we here?" Because otherwise, and said, "Okay, why don't you talk with our lawyer?" I mean, that was something that really, I mean, it's quite shocking if you think about a lawyer. A lawyer is featured in this moment, these people arrive there and say, no, don't worry. When you come back from the rest of your conquest, our lawyer is going to give you the answer. So the lawyer went into the study of the Quran and found an escamotage. He found that basically the people of the book, the holy people of the book, that were not only the Christians and the Jews, but also the mysterious Sabians that nobody knew what they were. So because nobody knew what they were, when the Caliph came back, said, "What religion are you?" "We are Sabians." "And who is your god?" "Hermetes Trismegistus." And because Sabian is featured in the Quran, they had to accept it. And that was how the Hermetica, which, as you know, is at the foundations of the Renaissance and the rebuilding of a cultural revolution that changed forever the history of the Western world, is actually due to the fact that these people had preserved a lot of ancient knowledge that had been destroyed in Europe, eliminated. Even Greek philosophers had been eliminated. So today, often the Arab world talks about, well, we have the golden age, we invented algebra, we did this and that, even coffee, But the truth is that in reality, they were absorbing a lot of knowledge from the lands they were conquering. They were not really elaborating anything completely new, because algebra in itself, the basis of it apparently came from from India, from the ancient Hindu tradition. So they were re-elaborating, but they were very clever at re-elaborating. And when it comes down to algebra, of course, nowadays we have algorithm, and algorithm is actually coming from the name of the guy who invented algebra, who was a Muslim. So, I mean, here we're talking about the basis of what is actually putting us together today. We are talking thanks to that algorithm. So how we went from a golden age to what we have now, the barbarism of most of the Muslim world, and at the same time, the elitism of the Wahhabi. Well, the history that I put together from the very roots of Islam in the Arab Peninsula to all its expansion, in the end, makes you realize how this religion developed, how this religion, of course, developed with a variety of schism that at times gave birth to even new religions that are not even considered Muslim by Muslims or Islamic, like the Druze, for example, that are not always considered as Muslim, or other forms of. But when it comes to the allies, the first allies that created the jihadism, because here we have to go. Today, we have Al-Qaeda, we have ISIS, but let's make a nice representation, of simple representation for your viewers so they will have an idea. No, we start from, okay, the most recent newcomers, ISIS. And ISIS is not only an acronym, it's also ISIS as the moon goddess, just to make it clear. It's a double. And then we have Al-Qaeda. They all come from Salafi jihadism, which originates from the Muslim Brotherhood, which was founded by al-Banna in 1928, who was himself a disciple of a Freemason called Jamaluddin al-Afghani. So who was this Freemason, Jamaluddin al-Afghani? Well, Jamaluddin al-Afghani was considered by Madame Blavatsky as one of the unknown superiors. Jamaluddin al-Afghani was a guy with a turban and might have looked like some kind of extreme, figure in the Muslim, but in reality, he's considered the father of Islamic modernism and also of the Salafi movement that evolved in two separate directions. There was a Salafi Wahhabi movement from Wahhab that became the basis of the future riches of the oil consortium of the Emirates, because that's, these are rich people. And who is financing then the poor ones? The Salafi jihadists, the desperados from the third world that are recruited to attack, of course, the West or destabilize various countries in Africa and the rest, or even in Asia. Well, that is, of course, the whole thing of the Salafi movement, which is actually Sunni, so it belongs to the Sunni world, is actually picking up on a jihadist tradition that was originally established, though, by the Assassins. And that's why on the cover of the book here, in between these two swords, under, you have basically a cross with Muhammad wearing a turban. That cross is the Baphomet, is the original Baphomet. And nobody has ever showed it before, because after the discovery was made in a Templar church between Syria and Turkey, it was put in a depot in Istanbul and never showed publicly, because they will blow up any museum that dares to show that cross. The fact that Muhammad already can't be depicted or represented in Islam already makes it clear that it's an heresy. At the same time, the fact that you're putting Muhammad on a cross, well, that is immense heresy. So what was Muhammad on a cross doing in a Templar church? Well, we know when the Templars were basically judged by Philippe the Fair, and of course they were sanctioned for heresy by the church. We know that from the interrogations that were given, they were worshipping some kind of mysterious thing that apparently was Baphomet. But Baphomet, we then discover, is actually the word Mohammed in Occitan or in French, and there is links that basically prove that this Baphomet was actually Mohammed. There is also a mysterious head, but that head that was severed apparently was the head of Mansur al-Alaj, which tomb is in Baghdad, which is a very important Sufi representative. And of course, it's also very important for members of the Illuminati, because Aleister Crowley inserted him, taking the place of Hiram Abif in the initiations of the Ordo Templi Orientis, the OTO. So in this book, thanks to the late Grandmaster of the Gerai Helveti, which were a Sufi group in Turkey, and also a man of great intellect called Gabriele Mandelkan, he sent me the actual photo of this Muhammad on the cross, of this Baphomet, which finally reveals the truth. And this truth is going to be shocking, because it's a truth that is basically demonstrating that there was a secret alliance that was not only an alliance, but was a conversion. Certain Knights Templars were converted.
Folks, at the very heart of our democracy lies a principle we hold sacred: free speech. It's the cornerstone that supports every freedom we cherish. Yet, in today's digital age, discussions about our wealth, our rights, and our future are being silenced or overshadowed in mainstream narratives, leaving many feeling voiceless in conversations crucial to our financial independence and security. This is where wealth protection research steps in. armed with a mission that's never been more critical. Wealth Protection Research is not a financial advisory firm. They're defenders of free speech committed to giving a voice to the silenced. Wealth Protection Research tirelessly seeks out financial experts. These are the voices that challenge prevailing narratives, especially as we navigate the uncertainties of the 2024 election. Wealth Protection Research has created a 2024 Election Wealth Protection Report. This free report highlights the 3 best ideas for protecting and growing your money heading into the 2024 election. It contains ideas the mainstream media won't even touch, and listeners can get it completely free. So text IDEAS to 76626 to claim your free copy. If you believe in the sanctity of free speech and the importance of financial freedom, then act now. So text IDEAS to 76626 to claim your free copy of this 2024 Election Protection Report. It's time to widen the scope of what we're told, to hear the ideas the establishment does not think you can handle, and to take control of our financial destinies. So folks, today, text IDEAS to 76626 to claim your free copy.
But also we have to understand another thing. Up until the Crusades, there was no such concept as holy war in the Christian world. Jesus Christ never talked about, of course, for those who have studied the New Testament, they all know that there was no jihad or no holy war, because otherwise Jesus would have not gone on the cross. He would have simply, okay, with this sword, let's maybe, of course, on his return. But when it comes down to Christianity, as we know it, it is a religion that never predicated some kind of holy war. However, what happened was this. As the Muslims were expanding more and more, and they were becoming a serious threat to even to the Vatican, because as we said, south of Italy was in their hands. We are talking about very close to the Vatican. I know myself a town near Rome called Saracinesco, Saracens, where the Arabs themselves went and established a ribat. What is a ribat? Ribat is the concept that basically taught the future crusaders how to operate, meaning that nowadays in the Middle East, and also we saw it with 9/11, everybody was rejoicing, in the Muslim world with 9/11, and they were saying, the infamous Crusaders, the Crusaders, the Crusaders. Well, in this book, I demonstrate with serious sources, very serious sources, that basically the Crusades were inspired by the Muslims themselves, because they inspired the Pope to indict a holy war. They inspired the Vatican to go in Syria, find out about the secret societies there, and of course, then establish knighthoods like the Knights Templars, which are completely based on the order of assassins in the way even the red symbol on a white mantle. So here we are basically with a history that spans over 1,000 years, that then goes from the moment in which the Secret Alliance helped the Knights Templars. At one point, they were in Gaza. It was clear why they were in Gaza. Gaza is a port. You arrive there, and then you go to Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, their fortress, where it was on Temple Mount. Today, when you are talking about Hamas, you're talking about the Al-Aqsa Brigade, the Al-Aqsa Flood, the Al-Aqsa Force. It's all based on that thing, which basically they claim it's theirs because of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock, and everything else. But for those who don't know that, the Muslim actually arrived, a companion of Prophet Muhammad arrived and conquered Jerusalem brutally, of course, only 5, but not before when Muhammad was alive. He was already dead. So they had to change the history of the Quran and adapt it. And they said that in a dream, Muhammad went with a winged creature to what is the Temple Mount, and from there ascended to heaven. And then, of course, the Dome of the Rock was established. But he was already dead. So you see the inconsistency here. We're talking about already instrumentally using a religion going into a place which, of course, was holy for the Jews because it was the second temple. We're talking about the Temple of Solomon, the place for the most holy of holies, also of Freemasonry, because it's central also to the allegory of Freemasonry, the King Solomon Temple. So the Jewish world, of course, found themselves destabilized. They put together then what, like I said, became the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and then that became basically the third most important site in Islam after Mecca and Medina. So Mecca, during Muhammad's first years when he established himself, eventually he got to channel this whole Quran. The cousin who taught him a lot, the Ebionite the Christian cousin of the wife, didn't live to see Islam being so powerful, because at one point in Mecca, the merchants of Mecca, but also the people who had these 360 idols, got pissed off with Muhammad, saying, how can you preach one God here? We have 360. We can't just send them out of business. So they kicked him out of Mecca, and he ended up a 12 days camel journey into the city of Medina, the oasis, which became, for that reason, the second most important city place in the Islamic tradition. But having said that, Muhammad, after went back when he was strong back to Mecca, and of course made a big show with his destroying all these idols and portraying himself as the ultimate monotheist. But that's true a little bit, but not totally. Why? Well, Salman Rushdie. Recently, he was stabbed in the eye, as you know, here in America, unfortunately. Salman Rushdie got a fatwa from Khomeini, from Ayatollah Khomeini, for having written a novel called The Satanic Verses. But those satanic verses, what are they, these satanic verses? Why he got a fatwa? Because in the early days of the spread of Islam, Muhammad wasn't still considered infallible. And the Muslims found that there was a passage in the Quran in which Muhammad was basically trying to embrace the goddesses of Mecca so he could bring the people of Mecca towards him. And, that is no monotheistic thing. I mean, he's talking about the goddesses paganism. And of course, the early Muslims said, well, Muhammad must have been very confused to do that. And of course, this is satanic. That's why they call them satanic verses. So there was, of course, like I said, a pre-Islamic era full of paganism. That paganism, just like in the Christian world with Catholicism, was absorbed, was never completely eliminated. Like, for example, in the Catholic world, every single deity became a saint, a patron saint, or a different kind of Holy Mary that maybe needed to cover up the worship of Isis here or of another deity there. The same thing happened in Islam. It's not completely true that they are the ultimate monotheistic faith, because, like I said, even Muhammad did some compromises earlier on. So the beginning of Islam was not so peaceful. The moment in which, though, they arrived in Cairo, they met with the ancient tradition, and that was the establishment by the Fatimid dynasty of a very powerful lodge known, Nesta Webster used to call it the Terrible Lodge of Cairo, because from this lodge we had many terrible things coming up, like the creation of the Nizari Assassins that made their alliance with the Knights Templars. It was basically which initiated in 9 degrees their own subjects, and one of their subjects was Hassani Sabah. Hassani Sabah went on through the initiations, became very influential in Cairo, but at one point he got some kind of controversy with the local military chief, and he had to flee Cairo, and he established this fortress in Alamut and other fortresses and they became a very big, important power. And like I said, they did all the dirty work for the Knights Templars. They basically became the sicari, the killers of the Knights Templars. And at the same time, they devised an extremely well-crafted way of bringing people into the jihad with the promise of virgins, of this and that, and plenty of hashish. We see the same thing happening with Mohammed Atta. Where is Mohammed Atta coming from? Egypt. Now, when you go to the father of Mohammed Atta and you ask him, your son, Mohammed Atta, it's all the fault of the Mossad. Listen, my friend, it's not the fault of the Mossad. The fault of those Salafi jihadists like Osama bin Laden, they come from the tradition, like I said, and here we have to go back a moment to what I said before about Jamaluddin al-Afghani, which basically brought into the Sunni world this Shia modality. That's why today we also have this alliance, which seems a little bit weird, between Hamas and Iran. Hamas is Sunni, Iran is Shia. It's more natural, of course, that Iran will be allied with Hezbollah because Hezbollah is Shia. But actually, jihadism is a product that originated from the Shia world and then expand, because if we see the history of the first 2 or 3 centuries of Islam, before actually the assassins and the Nizari assassins came to life, the first 2 centuries, of course, we had a jihad, but we didn't have a jihad. First of all, we have a bigger and a lesser jihad, and some intended jihad as an internal struggle, other intended as an external, but they intended it as a conquering thing in which they were fighting simply following the rules of knighthood, of traditional, traditional knights that will be there with swords fighting each other in a tradition, not people that will come to you in the middle of the night and cut your throat dressed in black with a thing. That is it's more like a ninja. What we're talking about with the Assassins establishment is basically what we see in Japan with the ninjas. They are not traditional. They don't respect any form. It's not the samurai that duels with a sword in front of you. It's somebody that comes to you when you are sleeping and cuts your throat. Is no respect, because you see there is an ethic in the knighthoods and in the battles. Saladin, with the Seljuk Turks, he had an ethic, and in fact, the assassins tried to kill him 2 times. But Saladin himself had an ethic up to a certain extent, because when he was in Gaza, he arrived in Gaza where the Templars had their fortress, and the Templars couldn't guess every Christian and Jew that was around Gaza. The ones that were left out were slaughtered by the Muslims. So what goes around, they say, comes around. So let's go. So you see what I'm saying here? They are now showing these Muslims being slaughtered. But what happened a few hundred years ago? When you are doing those things, you are basically seeding for future plans of hate to create ulterior hate. So the book explains how the Cairo Lodge stayed there for almost 1,000 years, but later on, with the establishment of speculative Freemasonry in the West, both in France and in England, as the North Africa and the Middle East came under the more and more influenced by the English and the French, who wanted the Ottoman Empire to capitulate, and that ended up with the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and then later on with the Balfour Declaration, which brought back the people to Israel. But to understand where we are now, we have to definitely know the past. That's why my book is not taking sides here. It's simply showing you that no Muslim, no Christian, no Jew has the ethic and moral superiority to go up a hill and say, we did it all perfect. No, I'm sorry. That's not the case. So that you have to see yourself reflected in a mirror and say, I have sinned. I have done wrong. I shouldn't have done that. England shouldn't have destabilized with France the Ottoman Empire to create the chaos which ensued later sponsoring the development of future jihadism and the Masonic lodges of Jamaleddin Afghani with the money coming from the Suez Canal. This is wrong. The destabilization of places like Algeria, Morocco, that all their leaders, the father of Algeria was a Freemason initiated in Egypt by the Grand Orient of France. So these things are historical facts that can't be debunked. That's why my book at the moment is being received, even in the Muslim world, with a lot of respect, because I have over 750 citations here from credible sources. I have documents, I have photographic evidence. And so what can they do to debunk me? There is no debunking. There is finally somebody who is telling the Muslim world, you shouldn't point your finger only to Greater Israel conspiracy or to the West or to the Illuminati of the West, because Bush father and Bush son were working with the Saudis and with and building up this whole thing. But it's an alliance between Western and Middle Eastern Illuminati that goes on. And you can't blame only us when you are at fault too.
So you're saying that this is, in a lot of ways, that it's in the Islam and the energy behind it, especially through the lodge in Cairo and Freemasonry, that it's become this. It's really an alliance between the Western and the Middle Eastern Illuminati.
Where is it that today, when the Mossad, the Shin Bet, the CIA, the Qataris, where do they meet every week?
And see, okay, this leads me to my question, though.
They meet in Cairo.
Okay, and so here's the question I have. I'm trying to, because you have so much information. I'm like rapidly trying to process and kind of build these maps and ideas in my mind. And so, okay, I know that there's been a lot of people discussing, say, let's look at the Clintons and Obama, ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, right? There's also a lot of people talking, especially now, about the role of the Jews in Israel, right? And I tend to agree much more with you that anytime we think that, like, okay, this side is good, this side is bad, we're wrong, because they're controlling both sides. They've infiltrated both sides. And it's just like Soros, right? Being Jewish, yet also funding the anti-Jewish. It's just a little example.
Like I said earlier, being Jewish, but what kind of Jewish?
Yes.
Being Christian, but what kind of Christian? If I go to a Catholic and I say, what kind of Catholic you are? He might say, well, I follow Pope Francis. So that is a guy who is obviously following the Second Vatican Council and all the lies of the Jesuits. If I hear instead, well, I go to traditional Mass in Latin, it means that they are pre-Second Vatican Council and that their approach is very different. In fact, that's why they were investigated by the FBI. So here, when you are asking what kind of Jews, it's very important that people also understand about the Sabbatean Frankists. That's why the last chapter of my book is dedicated to the Sabbatean Frankists and their involvement with the making of the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which became the basis for the Mein Kampf and the Holocaust of Adolf Hitler. From 1925, it was published by a Maronite priest first, and then by a series of Arab and also Persian publishers, and became one of the most important books. They make TV series in Syria, in Egypt, are based on this big lie. It's not really a big lie. The protocols of the Elders of Zion needs to simply be interpreted in a different way. Is the protocols of the Sabbatean Frankist Elders of Zion, or the Sabbatean, and then you will have it fine, and that's it, fine. But everything they did, they are doing. But when you are blaming the Zionists without specifying what kind of Zionism, that you are in the wrong, because Zionism was founded by Theodor Herzl as a nationalistic movement. After a couple of years, it was infiltrated left, right, and center by those communist friends of Karl Marx and stuff that basically gave birth to labor Zionism. And those are the people who eventually, with the Rothschilds, who are Sabbatean, frankly, and there was a guy also involved with the Rothschild who, before the establishment of Zionism, was involved in the Damascus affair. That was considered the first place in which the Muslims started to slaughter the Jews. And we are here basically in the 19th century, in the middle of the 19th century. Adolf Crémieux is an important Jewish Mason, French Jewish Mason and lawyer, who becomes the sovereign commander of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, a very influential position. And he, together with Rothschild, basically established the Alliance, this Alliance Israélite Universelle, basically was established before the advent of Zionism, but was already working behind the scenes on what will become the future labor Zionism. So basically, these protocols came out of a lodge of Adolf Crémieux by an author called Maurice Joly, who was working for Adolf Crémieux, who was pissed off with Napoleon III because he didn't. And then the whole thing was adapted so they could attack the Jewish people at whole. And the Sabbatean Frankists, they are the worst enemy of the Jews, and they are Jews. If you go to any Jewish intellectual and you ask, who is the worst enemy of the Jews? The Jews. Adolf Hitler was partly Jew, unfortunately. So this is how, how things are. The protocols of the Elders of Zion have become so influential that Hamas has included a reference to them in their manifesto in 1988. So this is not just a book. I have a friend of mine from England who, was interviewed recently by The Guardian. And at one point, The Guardian the journalist said, well, but the protocols don't exist. What do you mean don't exist? They have been published since the early 20s in Germany. They became a bestseller, and Adolf Hitler even cites basically these protocols. And everybody in the Nazi Third Reich was obsessed with this whole thing. So what are we talking about here? Because we have to be very honest about things. The uncle of Yasser Arafat was the Grand Mufti friend of Adolf Hitler who inspired the Holocaust. So when we are seeing all this hate, generating hate, let's not forget where this hate is coming from. Because if I was a Jew, I'm living in Israel, and I was forced basically to live in Israel because for hundreds of years there were pogroms. There was that culminated ultimately, then we had the Holocaust. We were persecuted in Russia. We were persecuted in Germany. We were persecuted everywhere. Well, at that point, they went to Israel. Now, they are the invaders. They have taken away the homes of the Palestinians who pre-lived there. Of course, this generates hate because they had to go somewhere. Are we going to send them to another planet? So it's very much when Theodor Herzl founded the Zionist Congress, and it was proposed where to go and establish this new project which will become Israel. He himself wasn't necessarily wanting to propose initially Palestine, knowing all of what was happening there. At the end, it was a convenient move made by the Brits, the Balfour Declaration, the letter addressed to Lord Rothschild, to invite them to go back to Israel. But in reality, British Israelism is to blame. Great Britain is to blame. The British Crown is to blame. Because when we talk about Zionism, what is Zion? Basically the idea that you have to go back to Israel and reestablish Israel. No? Well, this idea was actually pushed by the English Freemasons in course with the Sabbateans. But even before the birth of the Sabbatean, the father of Shabbatai Zevi was a British spy. So here we are basically, British Israelism was pushing this idea. They were not like the Germans who persecuted them, forced them in the end to leave, whatever, no? or put them in concentration. No, the English were a little bit more subtle. No? They were kind of saying, oh, well, we are the lost tribe of Israel. We are all friends. Of course, the Rothschilds were nobilitated in England. They were given a title. As you know, they became part of the establishment in the Victorian era. This Israeli became so everything was fine. No, it seemed quite fine. But in the background, there was this push to bring them back to Israel. And so today, we have the present mess because the English and the French, which then later on, before the Balfour, the Sykes-Picot Agreement on the spheres of influence, of this falling Turkish Ottoman Empire that for 800 years ruled the Middle East in relative peace and equilibrium, without all this hate. When we go and see the roots of this hate, we said the Muslim Brotherhood. Who sponsored the Muslim Brotherhood? Great Britain with the Suez Canal money. Who inspired the birth of the Muslim Brotherhood? We go to Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani, who was basically had two British handlers in the British intelligence who made for him room to establish one of the most powerful lodges in Cairo, which was called the Eastern Star Lodge. So when the English saw that, for example, the Egyptian Freemasons were doing too much politics and religion in their lodges, they were very pragmatic about it. With their cup of tea, the Lodge of England is not suitable. We don't discuss religion and politics. So what are we going to do? Well, get these lodges under the Grand Orient of France, as they will do politics and religions, no problem, because they had just separated from the regularity of Freemasonry to open to all the people who want to do politics and religion in their lodges. So this book shows all these secrets that I think will shock a lot of people and will also make people understand that it's very simplistic to blame everything on one group of people, one ethnicity, or a singular order or lodge. When we know that, for example, George W. Bush, who was calling Islam a religion of peace the week after 9/11, he was actually working in courts with the Saudis, who are the biggest sponsors of terrorism. And with people within, you see, it's not like Bush was working with any kind of person. Bush was working with people who took the excess money made from the sale of oil and reinvested it in the creation of these Salafi jihadist groups. So it's all connected, and it's all, I mean, to see what's happening in the universities today, where basically you have Hamas thanking these idiots who go parading with their hate in the university, when at the same time I see my friends in places like InfoWars giving credit to the bullshit of the Khazarian myth, which is debunked very well by this book, by the way, that everybody should read it if they want to debunk the Khazarian myth. There is no Khazarian DNA, okay? And all those conspiracies are complete and utter BS. The truth, instead, the truth of what I'm saying here is that, of course, there is corrupt Jews, there is corrupt Christians, there is, of course, corrupt Muslims. And the problem with the Muslims, from my own personal experience, and they're probably the more corrupt of the whole bunch, and the more easy to manipulate because their ulema, their whatever, their imams, they say you can only study one book, you can only, so it makes it easy for them to be highly manipulated.
So would you say that
like I said, yeah?
So would you say that Muslims are also controlled by the Sabbatean Frankists in the same way that like they've infiltrated that? So would you say that like the Rothschilds, for instance,
it goes even back to before the Sabbatean Frankists?
Okay.
When we see the history of Islam, what was the first schism? The Shiites, no? Shiite. Well, the guy who actually fought to promote this new this new branch of Islam, was actually a Jew. So Jews, we have 4,000 Jews within the Nizari-Assassins. What were they doing, all these Jews within? But they were not your traditional Jews. They were part of what my friend Roseanne Barr taught me are called the Erev Rav. And you can find them. You just Google Erev Rav. Erev Rav is a problem that has been with the Jewish people from the very moment Moses brought out of Egypt his people, because he didn't bring out of Egypt only the Jews. There were some high priests, some mages, some magicians who, seeing the power of Moses was so important, so relevant, they actually asked Moses if they could follow him. And so they become the heretical Jews that work and lurk behind the corner, working and trying to conspire. And that manifested ultimately, of course, with the Sabbateans, with Sabbatai Zevi, and later on with Jacob Frank. But the problem that I have at the moment is all this anti-Semitism and this superficialism with the accusation, Zionist, and then there is even people who say, Zagami, you are a Zionist. Listen, my friends, you are getting it completely wrong here, because if we start condemning a whole race of people, then there is no equilibrium or no future justice or peace. When you start condemning a whole race of people, you are in the wrong. That's it.
I feel like that's what they want. They want everything to be polarized. It's A versus B. You pick either A and all of B is evil, or you're B and all of A is evil. And when we fall into any of those traps without realizing that there's good people in A, there's good people in B, there's very evil people in A, very evil people in B as well. I think that's one of the traps that keeps us fighting. So,
but there is also the Illuminati, what I refer, generalizing, of course, as the Illuminati, as the upper echelons of this system, who have infiltrated and are manipulating all the various religions so that everybody fights against each other while they make more money with the military industrial complex and the big pharma, and it carry on forever. If we are so stupid to carry on with this kind of divide and fall into their divide and conquer policies, well, we will never end up being stupid, and we will continue with these confrontations for the rest of time, until we eventually blow all of us, we all blow each other up with a nuclear bomb, and that's it. Because I mean, if we are so stupid, then that's the future of humanity. I mean,
unfortunately, it is.
When you are arming a guy like Bin Laden to fight the Soviet Union, do you think that that guy, once the Soviet Union is finished, will finish his work and will become basically an unemployed guy? No, he was continuously employed by the CIA until he actually blowed up and created when they say 9/11, 9/11 is really important. It's not an inside job, though. It's an inside-out job, made possible thanks to this ancient alliance that basically, for 1,000 years, brought together the Knights Templars, originally with the Assassins, that were an emanation of the Cairo Lodge, but at the same time, when Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani and the English brought back this speculative Freemasonry into Egypt, merging with their own pre-existing secret societies and giving birth to a new jihadist movement within Sunni Islam. So basically, here we are with the West having evolved in a certain way during Illuminism and then, of course, the Industrial Revolution. For us, Freemasonry and the Illuminati was about big business. It was about modernization of our society, no? In the Middle East, instead, they went the opposite way. They went back to the Middle Ages. Their so-called modernism didn't really evolve into something that was positive. And so when I have nowadays in front of me ISIS and Al-Qaeda they are simply like the Muslim Brotherhood or Hamas or Hezbollah, tools of the NATO military industrial complex. That's it. Made to destabilize nations which are basically forced into eternal poverty because it's us here in the West that don't want them to develop. That is a big problem, a big responsibility, because for us, the interest is not to see a modern Egypt, a modern Morocco, a modern Libya, or a modern whatever, or Turkey even. No, no. Leave them in their cradle of lies and bigotry and bullshit, so they will never evolve. In the meantime, of course, the ones who evolve wearing their nice is the Wahhabis. The Wahhabis, another great creation of the Brits. That, by the way, after the Second World War, the Brits were in debt with America because America had helped them against Adolf Hitler. So what does America ask the Great Britain? Can you present us your friends in Saudi Arabia so we can start doing business with these people, because we need the oil and we need the riches of the soil and stuff. And that's what they did. So you see here how many compromises, how much evil there is. It's incredible. And the way that we see all this division on the internet, this hate, and this also superficial approach to the subject. Because when we are talking about Freemasonry, well, we're talking about Freemasonry that comes from the Middle East. When you talk about Rosicrucianism, you're going to study the manifesto. The Rosicrucian manifesto was Christian Rosenkreuz going from Cyprus into the Middle East and acquiring all the knowledge. Being a real or an allegoric tale is still telling you what they did. The knowledge, for example, of the elementals being the gene of Islam, was taken from the city of Fez in the Fama Fraternitatis. When we are talking about the rise of Nazism, I mentioned the uncle of Yasser Arafat, but we have also Rudolf Otzenbottendorf, the founder of the Lodge Thule Gesellschaft of the German Orden, which Adolf Hitler became a member. And he was given the secret rituals of the Turkish Sufi Freemasons to adapt and to channel that energy that will magnify his speeches and make him irresistible. So all the Nazi elite had on their table a copy of the Mein Kampf, a green pencil, and a copy of the Quran. That's it. And so here we are, an Holocaust inspired by the Muslims against the Jews. We have Nazism, which basically was inspired by the Sabbatians living in Salonicco in Turkey, who initiated Rudolf Otzenbottendorf, a German who acquired the Turkish citizenship after going to Egypt, of course, and coming in contact also because with the knowledge, the secret knowledge of the Sabbatians in Salonicco, which was and is still a very important place, and the Domme, because in Turkish the Sabbatians became known as the Domme because outside they claimed to be Muslims, and inside they were crypto-Jewish heretical Sabbatians. This happened because Shabbatai Zevi himself converted to Islam in 1666. So I think that people will realize that in this book, nothing is left untouched, including the rise of the evil side of Zionism. So, I mean, I'm not, saying one side is better than the other. I'm just saying they're all
They're all bad.
They're all bad. And until they genuinely get around the table, not to do what Pope Francis wants to do, which is basically a one-world religion built up on the lies of his religious allies like the Imam of Al-Azhar, which is a product of the Cairo Lodge, or the various representatives of the Shia tradition, which he went and visited in Iraq in the middle of the pandemic to build this one world religion after his encyclica Fratelli Tutti, which is a Masonic encyclica. Freemasonry will never be able to establish a genuine one world religion because that's not the way forward. We instead need to understand our own religions and all the problems that we had in our own house before we can attack somebody else. So my book wants to be actually a text of peace, a possible text of peace that could bring this understanding, a much wider understanding. When we are talking about the 9/11 mega ritual, we are talking basically about the skull and bones, whose symbol, by the way, is the symbol of a Knights Templar symbol, which we also see in the 30th degree of Freemasonry, and his assassins. Mohammed Atta smoked dope, had beautiful ladies and stuff. He was acting like, I mean, he wasn't acting like a guy from a cave in Afghanistan. And even the name I told you before, Jamaluddin al-Afghani, that seems all a little bit Afghanistan. Well, Jamaluddin Afghani was actually a Persian. Al-Afghani was his own creation, so he could pass for a Sunni in the Sunni world. You see how manipulative these people are.
Oh,
Jamaluddin al-Afghani was the guy who brainwashed the first jihadist Sikari of the modern era who went and killed the Shah. So, I mean, and then we have, of course, Iran, how Iran in the 70s and 60s became this mix of clerics, which of course then led to the emergence of Ayatollah Khomeini, and at the same time of socialist Marxist values, which were, as you know, spreading throughout all the universities of the West, and so they also spread in the Middle East. The result is Islamo-communism and the Republic of Iran in 1979. But at the same time, I also explain, and this is a book about great revelations. This is a book that is going to shock you because there is the testimony of Mehmet Ali Akça, the guy who, as you know, attempted to kill John Paul II. He says that the guy who employed him to go and kill John Paul II was Khomeini. And why did Khomeini want to kill the Pope? Not for some religious reason. People think, oh, because they were. I tell you, the real reason is revealed in my book. And with testimony of real mafiosi, Gianni Russo, who basically explained how in the early month of June 1979, while they were preparing for the establishment of the Republic of Iran, and the last Shah of the Pahlavi dynasty was about to leave the country, he employed through the Vatican and with the help of the Iranian Freemasons, who would become the Grand Lodge of Iranian exile, these mobsters from Sicily to arrive in Iran and pick up all the gold of the Pahlavi to bring it there in the Vatican. And so once Khomeini went in front of his people, he couldn't say that the Shah had left with all the gold of the country. So what he did, he said, Pahlavi left with nothing in his In reality, though, he was really pissed off. So that's why he employed after Mehmet Ali Akça to go and kill the Pope. And we know also, of course, that this was connected with the Bulgarian Secret Service, with Russia, that was, of course, aiding Iran still to this day, as they also have a very close alliance with the Alawites in Syria. So in my book, I also explain all the history of the Alawites. So it's never ending, really. The tales of these books are coming from the past, but in the end, they actually results in things that have it is like the title of the book, Islamic Freemasonry and the Secret Society behind the eternal conflict. They are behind the eternal conflict in the Middle East. So when you saw the founder of Hamas with the Supreme Ayatollah of Iran, the late founder of Hamas, and these two people, in theory, like I said, one is a Sunni, one is a Shia, but in reality, jihadism was encouraged, a comeback of jihadism was encouraged by Iran. Why? Because who were the original jihadists? Were they not Shia? They were not Shiite. They were the Assassins. So they were the ones who went to the Palestinians in the 70s and started to encourage them. So then from the Muslim Brotherhood came Hamas, then in the 80s. And this is very explained very, very much in detail with all the names in my book. So I hope that people will understand the relevance and importance of this book.
And so the book, the website I keep pulling up is just leozagami.com, which I will make sure I put that in the description. And I feel like, I mean, it's if you want to learn more about this, you got to read the book, because I have a lot of your books and they're thick, they're full of information. And what you gave right now is like 1% of 1% of the information that is in there. So Leo,
absolutely,
thank you.
I mean, I talk, for example, about also the rise of Ayatollah Taleghani, who died in 79, but who was one of the main features of this Islamic revolution and is linked to Palestine. I mean, nothing is left untouched in revealing and making clarity on the mess we have today in the Middle East. Yeah. And I hope that people understand after reading this book that it's not as simple as they think.
It's not.
And there is really a much more complex reality at work.
Well, Leo, thank you. It's always fascinating talking with you. I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you for coming on. I encourage folks to check out your website, check out your book. And until next time, take care and God bless.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me on your show, which is always an extraordinary show. And God bless America and the rest of the world, especially today.
Thank you. As we've talked about a lot, I believe that one of the greatest threats to our freedom comes in the form of digital currency, specifically central bank digital currency, which I believe would take away our freedoms in ways that we've never even imagined before, be that significant. Now, this past week, the House passed a bill that actually bans the Federal Reserve from issuing a central bank digital currency to the American citizens. Now, this seems like a fantastic thing, because it is. It's still forward progress, but there's a lot of things in there that are catching that aren't necessarily what they seem. So today with my guest, Dr. Kirk Elliott, we're going to be looking into the specifics of that bill and seeing what it really means and how it's only applying to a specific area of how this would affect us, and that we're still open to a very wide range of threats, especially on the global level. But we're also going to be talking about some recent resignations of some very significant people in the banking industry, including Klaus Schwab himself, stepping down as the I think chairman of the World Economic Forum. We've got Jamie Dimon from Chase announcing he's stepping down, the head of the FDIC. There's some pretty significant, kind of oddly timed resignations and announcements of resignations from major players in the financial industry. And finally, we're going to be discussing what's the bigger picture of what's happening with the BRICS nations and the de-dollarization, as we've talked about extensively on this show. So we had, I think in the past couple of days, a major person from the banking industry in Russia. I think he runs the second largest bank in Russia, if I'm not mistaken, made a few statements, but pretty significant statements about where the American economy is headed. And it's hard to ignore his words. And he's speaking, I feel, very honestly about where we're heading if we continue creating this much debt. We're rapidly going into debt in a pace that's probably never been seen before on this earth. I mean, it's absolutely insane. But he also shows how vulnerable the American system is, not just our financial system, but the government, the way of life in America as we see it, how vulnerable we are. Because as he points out, if some of these BRICS nations start dumping some of their U.S. Treasury bonds, that right there could, in conjunction with the money printing, could spell the end of America as we know it. So there's some pretty serious topics we're going to be discussing here. So please enjoy the show. Kirk, it's great to have you on as usual. Thank you for being here today.
Oh, it's so great to be with you. Hope you had an amazing Memorial Day weekend.
We did. Yeah, it was wonderful. I mean, family, flags, freedom, that's all you can ask for. So it was great. Thank you.
Yeah. Somber thing to remember those who gave their lives, for us to have freedom. but it's a celebration. It's a celebration of their lives and that we do have freedom. I mean, it's kind of a little bit of give and take there.
Yeah, it's also a reminder of the cost of freedom. And I think that in a lot of ways we've forgotten what the cost of freedom is, but we're learning it now as our freedom is on the knife's edge, unfortunately. But as you and I have talked about a lot, one of the biggest ways that your freedoms are taken away is through the financial system. And we've spent a lot of time discussing central bank digital currencies, and not just CBDCs, but also unified ledger, the much bigger picture of what this means to have our stuff digitally controlled. And so one thing that happened recently, and actually I'll pull up the press release here, is the House passed, this is earlier, about a little over a week ago, only a couple of days ago. So here we go. House passes CBDC Anti-Surveillance State Act. So it says, today the U.S. House of Representatives passed H.R. 5403, the CBDC Anti-Surveillance State Act, sponsored by Majority Whip Tom Emmer. It says it halts unelected bureaucrats from issuing a central bank digital currency which would threaten Americans' right to financial privacy without explicit authorization from Congress, which that seems like a little bit of a, I'm not sure how comfortable I am with that. But I want to see what you think of this, because this looks like a major win. It's like, okay, great. The giant threat on the horizon now is being subdued, but is there more to it than what there seems?
There always is. I mean, there just always is. But when you look at it, it's like, sweet, this is a win. They're gonna say central bank digital currency is outlawed, and just like what Norway did over the weekend, right? Norway actually said you can use cash in Norway. It doesn't all have to be digital. We basically prohibit retailers and merchants in Norway from rejecting customers because they want to pay cash, right? So it's like, okay, that one actually is more of a win than what this one is, even though the House said, no, we're not going to have CBDCs issued by the Fed. Okay, so there's some language in the bill that I kind of want to look at. So there's a subsection and there's an A, B, and a C part of it. If you scroll down there, it's pretty close to the top, but a little bit further, it's coming up. Okay, here. So Section 16 of the Federal Reserve Act is amended. So they want to amend the Federal Reserve Act from 1913. We're adding a new paragraph. A Federal Reserve Bank shall not offer products or services directly to an individual, maintain an account on behalf of an individual, or issue a central bank digital currency or any digital asset that is substantially similar under any other name or label directly to an individual. So people are looking at it, it's like, sweet, the Federal Reserve can't issue a central bank digital currency or offer products to clients, which is what like the Fed Now app would be. But here's where, when words have meaning, especially when it's in a bill, right? So did they talk about non-governmental organizations or other entities issuing digital currency or central bank type digital currency? No, they said the Fed, right? So here's where, to me, they're missing the entire point. And I think politicians are smarter than this, and they know that, to me, this is window dressing. It's political theater, trying to get people to say, oh, Congresswoman, you're amazing. You rejected central bank digital currency when 98% of the world wants it, and all these countries are behind it, right? But what does it not prohibit? It doesn't prohibit a global central bank digital currency issued by, for example, the Bank for International Settlements, or the World Bank, or the International Monetary Fund, or some kind of a special drawing right from the United Nations, or something like that, right? So to me, central bank digital currency is going to be a global thing, Because if you look at Agenda 2030 and the tenets of it, they want a one world government. They want a universal currency for everybody. They want population control. I mean, they want all kinds of stuff, but really they want one political system for the whole world. They want one currency for the whole world, right? So when you look at that, everything that we've looked at that you referenced in the first part of the show, the unified ledger, what a digital currency actually is, it's programmable money that can cut you off from buying or selling if your ideology doesn't match up with the globalist agenda. But the unified ledger is a creepy thing because everything that you own gets tokenized and you can change ownership of everything that you own with the flip of a switch. Now, why would they limit themselves to just a country being able to do that? And the answer is they wouldn't. Right? This is a global thing. So what the bill does say is that you can't have the Fed issuing a central bank digital currency, but it says nothing about a global non-governmental institution. And here's the thing, Seth, Biden already allowed for that to happen. When he basically went into the World Health Organization's 192 countries that say the president of the World Health Organization, under a state of a global health crisis, can stop your travel, can restrict your purchases, can restrict you from even opening a bank account, that can do all kinds of things. So our sovereignty was given up already by our president to this non-governmental organization. And what do? They're going to be able to actually issue a central bank digital currency if they want to, because they can control it with the stroke of a pen or with the power of their voice. They can say, you know what? It's a national emergency, a national health emergency. We have to get the global economy in lockstep with what this agenda is to save it from disease X or something like that. So therefore, we're mandating that everybody goes into a global currency issued by the IMF, let's say. I mean, we already gave up our sovereignty. So who cares what the House actually said in this? To me, it's has no teeth. Because, okay, so let's just say that it did have teeth. Well, it still has to pass the Senate. And I don't think the Senate would actually go along with the House. You know, it's too close there. There's only a couple votes difference. And then let's say that the Senate did pass it. Well, then the president has to ratify it or veto it, right? So either way, I don't think that we get it in its current form because either the Senate rejects it or the president does. But let's take it one step further. Let's say the Senate does accept this bill and they vote the same, and then the president accepts it. Well, why would they do that? Well, because they know that CBDCs doesn't matter at the federal level. It matters at the global level to actually have everybody be a global citizen. So to me, this bill that a lot of people on the right are very excited about, eliminating central bank digital currency, to me is truly political theater in an election year. I truly don't think it matters. And I'm not trying to be a negative Nelly. I'm just saying that words have meanings in bills. And to me, this bill actually has no meaning to it because they didn't broadly define enough who could issue central bank digital currency and who can't. They limited it to the Fed, not everything else that are global entities.
So one question that I have, and I think you're a good person to answer this because you deal with a lot of people that are trying to escape the economic system or systems that could end up enslaving them, right? So they're getting out of the path of that train. So looking at this, and I agree with you, especially from hearing your perspective, that, you know, I'll pull it back up again because you can see, like, specifically, right? The Federal Reserve Bank shall not. It didn't say that no governing or no banking organization, federal or international, may do X. It was just the Federal Reserve Bank. I mean, they could probably create some sort of shell company and call it the Federal Digital Reserve, and it probably would no longer be stopped by this, right? But
right,
The question I have, though, is it seems like, say, a year and a half ago when you and I are discussing CBDC, that a lot of your average folks here in America, if you said, one of the greatest threats is CBDC, they'd say, "Oh yeah, is that like the marijuana cream, like the CBD cream?" They didn't understand it. So, do you think that the fact that a bill that actually I'll go back to pull open the web page, so something that literally states, as we talked, as I read in the other page, actually I'll pull up the other one right here, right, where they say that the CBDC would threaten Americans' right to financial privacy, and this is on the Financial Services Committee.house.gov website. Do you think that there's been a much larger public awareness of central bank digital currency? Because ultimately, I don't really trust anything that Congress does, or really anything a president or anything that Trump says he's going to do. It's like, well, they're going to find ways around it. I think the only thing that really matters is if enough of we the people reject these systems, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing with this show, is to get enough people to see it for what it is and say, I'm not playing in that game. Because it's like any way we play their game, we lose. So the way to win is just don't play the game. So do you think that this is a reflection of more of the general American public becoming aware of CBDC? And are you seeing, through your own business and your own interaction with people, are you seeing that reflected on the client side, that there's a much more awake public when it comes to the threat of these central bank digital currencies?
Yes, but I think it's multifaceted. So to answer that specific question, yeah, people have an inherent, at least people who are freedom-loving people, have an inherent distrust and distaste for Big Brother, right? Which is what central bank digital currency is all about. It's not intended to fix a broken system. It's intended for people control. Look at the Bank for International Settlements, memorandums, the ability to cut off bank wires from bank to bank if the ideology of the use of funds doesn't match up. Look at the World Economic Forum, programmable money based on your digital social profile and social credit score. That's ideologically based spending. It's their words, not mine, right? So everybody has this inherent distrust of that. But, there's also an inherent distrust of banking in general. As banks are starting to really run out of money, be undercapitalized, and we just had news, 3 weeks ago, a month ago, of the big regional bank in Philadelphia that went into FDIC receivership, Silicon Valley Bank, and all those banks from last year. So this has got people on edge, right? And then here's where I start connecting some serious dots, right? And things aren't quite as they seem. So you look at what happened last week alone, and who's resigning from their positions. Massive numbers of big bank leaders are resigning. Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase, the CEO, announced his resignation of Chase. The guy who serves as the executive director of JP Morgan Chase resigned. The president of the FDIC resigned. Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum resigned. The CEO of HSBC resigned. So why? I mean, a lot of these people are big, massive globalists, been working on central bank digital currency for decades, right? For this whole plan of Agenda 2030. And then more recently, starting in 2019, really this march towards central bank digital currency. And you know what? They're almost there with climate control and everything else, and surveillance and digitizing money and getting rid of paper currency, kicking the US dollar out of the global sandbox, and that power shift to the BRICS nations. Literally, their dream is almost fulfilled. So why would they step down? Right. So, I'm thinking about this. It's like, okay, what would make me step down if we were about to get our dream of global domination, just right around the corner? Well, if they know that people aren't really going to accept it and it's going to have massive revolt and upheaval and revolution style response, and anybody who's in power is going to get caught holding the bag, right? They're going to get blamed for it. So if they resign, they're not necessarily going to get blamed for it. They're gone. Whoever is in power is going to get blamed for it. This is why Trump said, a couple months ago, said, I hope that the economy collapses before I get in. Right. Well, it's like, so people misinterpret that. It's like Trump is evil. He's anti-American. He doesn't want the U.S. economy to thrive. It's like, yes, he does. That's why he's running. He needs to change things. What he was saying is it's going to collapse whether I'm in or not right away, because there's been so much damage done. He wants to be the guy that rebuilds it. But he says, if it happens after I get in, people are going to blame me, even though it's not my fault. Right. So maybe they want out. I don't know. I don't know. But two of the banks, this is an interesting side note. JP Morgan Chase and HSBC are the largest global shorters of silver on the planet. Massive amounts of naked shorts, like hundreds of millions of ounces in naked short positions. So then the Friday before Iran did the drone strikes on Israel, they recommended all their citizens they start buying silver rather than gold, because they knew and they recognized these short positions. And if they want to beat America without ever firing a bullet, you just create fear and you cause their banking system to go down. Well, that massive number of short positions, they get hurt in multiples, not dollar for dollar, multiples if the price of silver goes up. So it's like, Seth, look what's happened to silver in the last 2.5 months. Literally the last, 10 weeks. Silver's gone from 22.5 to 32. Right? It's up like almost 50% in 2.5 months. Those banks that have naked short positions are in crisis mode. And you look at some different stories globally, the president of the CEO of the second largest bank in Russia. There was this article on Zero Hedge that I was reading just earlier this morning. He warns that the U.S. is inevitably headed for a serious economic crisis. But what he said in there was one direct quote that is really interesting, and it goes along with this naked shorts that these banks have in silver. So for those keeping tabs, the U.S. debt surpassed $33 trillion for the first time. The U.S. added $1 trillion worth of debt in 3 months. So once we hit 33 trillion, 100 days later, we added another trillion. We're adding $1 trillion of new debt every 100 days, right? So now we're at like 34.5 trillion, right? So this is interesting. So you read what this guy said, and on that article, you scroll down a little bit further, $1 trillion every 100 days. But there's a direct quote after these pictures show up that is, I've got to read to you because it's right there. So I am thoroughly convinced that America is inevitably headed for a serious economic crisis. The amount of debt currently held by the U.S. today has reached inconceivable astronomical levels, and the dollar's monopoly on the global stage is the only thing enabling the Americans to maintain such a level of debt. If the Chinese or the Arabs took their money out of the U.S., a complete collapse would ensue for the financial sector and the government. It's like, oh my word, Seth, what did he just say? He just said that the BRICS nations, if they start liquidating their U.S. treasuries, putting them on the open market, destroying the U.S. dollar, if they start not holding U.S. treasuries and start liquidating them, the U.S. economy is toast. It's on such precarious grounds that would destroy the financial system. It would destroy the U.S. economy. And what is Russia doing? They got rid of all of their U.S. treasuries. What is China doing? I mean, they're dumping U.S. treasuries like there's nobody's business, right?
Yeah, here's China, this chart right here. You can see.
Yeah. I mean, look, I mean, it's just actually coming down a lot of their number of holdings. Because what did it start at? You know, its peak, 1,500, so $1.5 trillion. And now it's at like 800 billion. So, I mean, we're almost 50% down in their holdings. And so they continue to liquidate. Who's buying those US treasuries? The rest of the world isn't. It's the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is using money that they print out of thin air to be the buyer of last resort. And this is why we have the inflation. This is why we have this explosive debt. And this is why the CEO of the second largest bank in Russia was pretty well connected, I'm sure. It would be like Jamie Dimon here in America talking to Biden. I'm sure this guy talks to Putin a lot if he's got the second largest bank in Russia. They know what's coming, Seth. They know that the U.S. is on shaky ground. And because of our debt, you know, this is biblical truth ringing out loudly. You know, a borrower is a slave to the lender. You can't keep using other people's money. You ultimately have to pay the piper or it's over. This is why God warns us numerous times throughout the word, his word, to don't get into debt. You know, live within your means, have wisdom, have discernment, and we haven't. And now even CEOs of foreign banks are seeing the writing's on the wall, it's over, and there's a power shift from the West to the East, and the BRICS nations, the BRICS plus nations, I hate to say it because I'm American, I want a strong dollar. I mean, I want a vibrant economy, but we're not playing this well, right? And we've lost that status as the reserve currency and everything else, and it's going to the East. And I don't think we can get it back at this point, right? Without a complete collapse of what we have. And then somebody like Trump coming in, changing it all together. You know, what did he want to do? He wants to fight back. He said, hey, first thing when I get into office, I'm going to slap massive tariffs on Chinese goods, right? Say, okay, so this is a delicate thing to do because you slap tariffs on Chinese goods, sure, it hurts them economically, but it has to be done quickly and swiftly and big because ultimately, if you put tariffs on Chinese goods and we're still importing a ton of stuff from China, it makes all of our stuff more expensive, and you're going to have the U.S. population in complete crying out for help. It's like, what? Prices are even higher than they used to be. You slap tariffs on foreign oil. Yeah, great way to hurt them because we won't be buying foreign oil. But since we still import so much, it impacts us. And so these things have to be done quickly, and they have to be done in a very wise way. And this is why these things are very delicate, right? But this is why I think that CEO of that Russian bank says we are spinning for an economic disaster, because it's very difficult to get out of the debt situation that we're in, even with diplomatic and political, you know, maneuverings. It's very difficult, Seth.
There's one other chart in that article, which I thought was really interesting. It was right below showing how China has been dumping its treasury holdings, right? Since really it started around 2015, 2016 is when they started kind of dropping. But then this next graph here, which this is interesting, it says it's not just China. It says treasury holdings are relatively flat based on Fed custody data, while according to the IMF, the world's sovereign nations have been panic buying gold. So this chart, the green line shows the world treasury reserves, right? These are, from my understanding, this is the amount of treasuries that are out globally, not just in China. For instance, these are all the countries holding U.S. treasuries. But then if you look at around 2019, you can see that there's this massive spike increasing in gold. So I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they're printing so much money, they're dumping so much money into the market that a flat line of world treasury reserves is a really bad thing. That I'm guessing you'd want to see that line going up in some sort of correlation to the money printing. But then if you look at the fact that it's not going up, but gold reserves are skyrocketing. I mean, gold reserves have basically doubled since 2019. They've gone from roughly, I'm not sure exactly what number this indicates, whether it's, three, I'm not sure what it's measuring there, where it's like 3 million, it says 3 million ounces or whatever that, whatever that's measuring there, but it's up to almost 5.5. So
Yeah.
it seems like they know what's coming. They can see what's coming. And nations that aren't run in the way our government is are telling their citizens. I'm hearing people talk about how, over, we're in Indonesia or Vietnam or China, and the government's telling us buy precious metals, buy precious metals. We're here in America. They're not saying that at all. They're saying, "Oh, we're gonna pay your student loans back for you, if anything." So, yeah, I think that something is coming, certainly, and if you put all this information together, it's hard to ignore. But I do just want to go back and just read one more time the words of that CEO of the. You say this? He's the CEO of the second largest bank in Russia. Is that what you say?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Second largest bank in Russia.
Yeah, saying, "I'm thoroughly convinced that America is inevitably headed for a serious economic crisis. The amount of debt currently held by the US today has reached inconceivable astronomical levels, and the dollar's monopoly on the global stage is the only thing enabling the Americans to maintain such a level of debt. If the Chinese or the Arabs took their money out of the US, a complete collapse would ensue for the financial sector and the government." So, and those are significant words coming from a major banking player in one of the most major BRICS nations he's kind of saying, look, America, we got you by the balls. Like,
Yeah.
we own all your debt, a large part of this debt. And if we dump it, your whole Ponzi scheme of money printing and everything is going to collapse. And it's not just your financial sector. The key there, right there. And the government. Like, so he's saying that basically these BRICS nations have the ability through their financial maneuvers to collapse our government. And this is really, really, really significant. This should be headline, on all the major media, like talking about not this guy's words specifically, because, he's just one person of many globally, but this, you and I know he's not making things up. This is real. Like that would be
Right.
the effect.
Well, look at the next line that he put when it says Costin added, right? If the West fails to revise its policy, I think that the move toward the collapse of the colonial system, the American way of life, our representative republic, right, will only accelerate. So he's saying that this financial collapse would also result in a change of he basically amplified the change in our government statement, right? He's expecting a complete overhaul. And what happens after this cycle of democracy, so to speak, kind of finishes its course? You change from a republic to a dictatorship, or a dictatorship to a republic. When it goes full cycle, this bondage that's created by putting too much power in the hands of the government, then it becomes too much for people, and it creates a cycle of slavery and bondage again. And so he's seeing the end of the American way, is what he's seeing from this financial collapse. Now, granted, just one guy, right? But a smart one who's probably in communication with Putin a lot, being the second largest bank in Russia. They know what their plan is to de-dollarize the world. And they're doing a really good job with it. How are they doing that? By allocating into mountains of gold, right? Giving themselves credibility, accountability, pulling out of these systems, these digital command and control type systems. And people think that Russia's like this horrible communist country, right? It's like, yeah, they're run by a ruthless dictator, but they've actually got more freedoms than America has in a lot of ways. I know people are going to throw rotten tomatoes at me, but when you look at Russia, it's like you assume that they're going to be run by a dictator. You look at America, and that's not the assumption, but we are, right? So that's more dangerous to me than somebody that's like, okay, what you see is what you get, where what you say is not what you get. There's things behind. I mean, this is how what America has turned into is weirdness and cloak and shadows and this move towards a complete globalist takeover of our way of life, Seth.
One thing I would say is that at least it seems like Putin is trying to protect his own nation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the thing, is that he's looking out, whereas here, it just seems like these criminals that have taken over our government, they want our nation destroyed. Like they have no reason to protect our nation. It's actually part of their agenda to completely collapse it. But something I was just going to mention, just in talking about this overall shift, is that we look at that chart with the IMF showing the gold holdings and everything. We've been talking about this. They're talking about it, and let's use it's a little bit farther fetched with currency. Let's imagine food. It's almost like here in America. Let's imagine that we're getting ready to enter into a major famine globally.
Yeah.
And the BRICS nations know the famine is coming, and they're telling all of their citizens, stock up on rice, stock up on beans, stock up on wheat. You have their governments doing the same. You look at, which you have this. You look at China's buying of grains, and China, I think, has the largest grain reserve globally. But it's almost like all these countries are massively stocking up on grain, telling their citizens to stock up on grain. We have the leaders of these countries, and the leaders, like the major farming industry, is saying, "Hey, everybody, hey, Americans, there's going to be a big famine. These are all the reasons that's going to be coming. Like, you better go buy some food." And yet here in America, our government's saying, "Folks, don't worry about it. We got you taken care of. There's going to be lots of food for everybody. Don't buy food." Yet the people like yourself and me, we're going to the rooftop saying, "Folks, there's a famine coming. Buy wheat. You get it now while you can." To me, that's the analogy of precious metals. It's like half the world sees it. You look at the buyings of these IMF, you look at these massive countries, they see what's coming, and they're stocking up like mad on precious metals. They're telling their citizens to stock up like mad on precious metals because they know what's coming. Whereas here in America, they're just lying through their teeth because they want us to suffer. They want financial collapse to come. They want us to be so poor and so broken that we're begging them for anything, and we'll take any kind of CBD system as long as it gives us that little bit of comfort and security at night. And this is what we're doing. This is what we're trying to get this message out there, is that we have to get out of the way. So, Kirk, precious metals, if folks want to work with you on precious metals, give me a quick kind of rundown, because I think a lot of folks have a lot of their assets sitting in IRAs, retirement accounts, 401ks, et cetera, and they feel like, well, it's kind of locked up until I retire. It's locked up for these reasons. For folks like that have been hesitant, first-time buyers or not, how does that work? If they want to say, think, you know what, I might as well move a third of that account over into silver because just in case, right? The same reason why if I have some extra money, I'm going to go buy some seeds, or I'm going to go buy some grain.
Yeah.
Walk us through that process.
So it's simple. You just call our office, 720-605-3900, and say Seth sent you. Or you go to the website link, goldwithseth.com. And what will happen is you will get scheduled. One of our schedulers will talk to you, ask you a few questions. What is it that Kirk and Seth talked about that caused you to want to reach out? What are your fears? What are your concerns? What are your dreams? And then we'll put you on the calendar with one of my amazing consultants who think like I do. They're bending over backwards to help and craft a strategy for success moving forward using precious metals to hedge against your other paper assets or things that you have, right? So then from that point, we fill out brief little forms, to move money from account to account, do an IRA rollover, or just, you wire the funds to us, and we call you when the funds arrive, and we confirm the allocation, and we buy it. Because it's never done. It's not a discretionary account. It's not our money. It's yours. I don't even believe it's your money. I believe it's God's money. So nothing is done without your permission. But my team will bend over backwards to do everything except fill out a couple small little forms. That's it. And so it's a real easy process. I've kept it simple on purpose and by design all of these decades to make the process easy, because a lot of people think gold and silver is hard. I've never done it before. Boy, I don't know what to think. It's a little scary. It's not. To me, it's just like any other asset. It's like buying a stock, bond, a mutual fund, anything, right? And so that's why we've made it really, really easy. It's just another thing that you can buy, and it's actually way easier than opening up a brokerage account, because it's a private transaction. You wire the funds, we ship you the metals, you have it, right? And then when you sell it, you have to, basically report your capital gains on your tax return. But these are things that only in certain circumstances we have to report on liquidation, right? It's like if you have 1,000 ounces or more, something like that, right? But you always have to, as a person, as an individual, report your capital gains. And this is let the buyer beware. And the reason I brought that up is because there's so many dealers out there that are saying, oh, old rare coins, you don't have to ever report them, wink, wink. It's like, no, that's wrong. You always have to report your gains. They're lying to you. And it's like, this is the kind of misconceptions that we want to educate every single client on, because gold and silver is so easy, so beneficial. When you look at what it's done over the last 2.5 months, it's up almost, well over 40%. When you look at what it's done over the last 3.5 years, up over 140%. I mean, these are amazing growth numbers that we should take advantage of to some level, to some degree, to hedge yourself against your other paper assets.
Well, thank you for walking us through that. So the phone number, the website will be in the description below the video or the podcast. Kirk, again, it's always great having you on. Thank you so much for doing what you're doing. Look forward to next week. Thank you again.
It's my pleasure. We'll talk to you soon.
All right.